Hey everybody, my name is Hannah Norton, and this is my second video presentation concerning my topic of the influence of music on mental health in elementary students. So the first article that I wanted to talk about was Complete Mental Health in Elementary School Children, Understanding Youth School Functioning and Adjustment. And the primary purpose of this article was to investigate, how complete mental health status influences school functioning and adjustment among elementary school children. Now, the setting took place in an urban city in Turkey, and the participants were 362 students in a Turkish public school. They were grades 5 through 8, so they were ages 10 through 14, and 43.8% of them were female. Meanwhile, 52.2% of them were male. Our dependent measures were student well-being and psychological distress, and I'm going to dive into those a little bit more when we get to our measurements. So all of the assessments were done through pencil surveys, so a pencil paper or paper pencil survey. And it included a lot of scales and surveys or questionnaires. So the first one was school belongingness scale, and it was a self-report. And all of the scales that we're going to talk about are self-report. It included 10 items that were on 2 subscales, so social acceptance and social exclusion. For social acceptance, if they felt social acceptance, they would think that people care about them in their school. And if they felt excluded, they would feel like their friends, teachers, and managers usually ignore them. Obviously, those are very too far extremes. Next, we have the school attitude assessment survey, and that was, again, self-report, and it was 35 items and 5 subscales. And those subscales were academic self-perception, attitudes towards school, attitudes towards teachers, motivation or self-regulation, and goal valuation. Next up, we have the social, my face is in the way. Our social and emotional health survey primary. So this was self-report, and it included 16 items, and the traits to assess were optimism, persistence, gratitude, and zest within each student. And students responded on a 4-point Likert type scale. So 1 was almost never, and then 4 was very often. Next up, we have the student pro-sociality scale, which is pretty simple. It was only 4 items, and it kind of explained how students do socially. Then we have the youth internalizing behavior screener. This consisted of 10 items, and it talked about youth emotional problems. The 10 items was broken down into 2 5-item subscales, which was covering depression and anxiety. And again, students answered in a 4-point Likert type scale, 1 being almost never, 4 being very often. Then we have the self-report academic achievement, which was a single item scale where they asked the students in the past year how they would describe the grades that they received in school. And students responded on a 5-point Likert type scale, 1 being 0 to 44, 2 being mostly 45 to 54, 3 was mostly 55 to 69, 4 was mostly 70 to 84, and 5 was mostly 85 to 100. Now we jump into our method. So obviously researchers, because they were working with students, had to provide consent forms, and those were provided to administrators and students, and they laid out the purposes and measures. And then, like I said before, with our instruments, it was a paper pencil survey, and it took each student about 35 minutes to complete during their free time at school. So our results, so there was a primary analysis, and researchers grouped the participants into 4 mental health groups. The majority of them were in the complete mental health group. Then we had 59 in vulnerable, 30 were in the troubled group, and then 27 were symptomatic but content. And here you see all of those groups in a table. So the findings were that there were small to large associations between social emotional health and positive school outcomes, as well as negative outcomes. So if they were doing well socially and emotionally, then they were doing pretty well in school. There were also negative associations between psychological distress, social emotional health, and school outcomes. So that means that the higher their psychological distress was, there was a negative correlation. So that means that the social emotional health, as the psychological distress went up, the social and emotional health and school outcomes went down. And here we see that in a table. So you can see all of these factors, the outcomes and everything. You see all of these scores broken down between groups and our means and standard deviations. We also found that adolescents in the complete mental health group had significantly lower social exclusion at school and lower victimization behavior than the troubled and symptomatic but content adolescents. So the better their mental health was doing, the better they were doing socially, which translates. So here we have our group comparison. So our group and then other groups and how they compare. So in conclusion, researchers found that social and emotional health play a major and impactful role in a student's general school functioning, which if you're, when you're watching this, you're probably like, yeah, duh. But it's important to have this in a study so that we can see it on pen and paper. My next article, and I am a little bit excited to talk about it because I love music therapy. It is called Effects of Music Therapy as an Alternative Treatment on Depression in Children and Adolescents with ADHD by Activating Serotonin and Improving Stress Coping Ability. Now, the purpose of this study was to determine the effect of music therapy as an alternative treatment on depression in children and adolescents with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder or ADHD. And this is done by activating the serotonin, which is 5-HT, and improving stress coping ability. And I'll show you how they measured those. So this actually occurred in a province in South Korea, and it's called the Chungcheongdo, which is in the Republic of Korea. Now, here are our participants, and they laid this out very nicely in a table. This actually came from the article. So they originally assessed 74 students for eligibility, and then 14 of them were excluded. 6 of them did not meet the inclusion criteria, which I'm going to explain that on the next page. Then some declined to participate, and then some for other reasons. So they were left with 60. And so they took that 60 and they divided it into 2 groups. So we had the ADHD control group and the ADHD music therapy group. The ADHD control group got standard care, and so standard care was like some sort of medication, and they were already doing it before this study. And then the ADHD music therapy group also received standard care, but they also received music therapy, and the music therapy was in the form of active and receptive music therapy. So active was actually playing instruments, and then receptive was listening. Then we lost some students and we ended up with 36 total. So each group ended up having 18. So 18 in the ADHD control group and 18 in the ADHD music therapy group. And here we have that lined out a little bit. So here are requirements that a couple failed on the previous screen, as I told you. The first requirement was that children and adolescents must meet the ADHD diagnostic criteria. Patients aged 7 to 8 years old must be diagnosed with ADHD and complaining of depression. Parental consent they have to have parental consent because they're minors. And then I found this very interesting, but they couldn't have any previous experience with music therapy, which I guess that makes sense. All right, our independent variables were active music therapy, like I said before, that was improvisation. So that was the actual playing of the music. And then receptive music therapy, which was the music listening. And then our dependent measures were 5-HT secretion, which is the serotonin receptors, cortisol expression, which is our stress hormone, blood pressure, heart rate, and then CDI, which is the Children's Depression Inventory, and DHQ, which is the daily hassles questionnaire, which they call it in this study the daily stress questionnaire. And those were psychological scales. All right, so assessment instruments. Literally instruments. We have this is for the music therapy group, but they, during their active music therapy, they got to play piano and rhythmic instruments. We also have SST tubes for blood sampling, which those were then used for measuring HT level. And this is the Alliance Waters 465 HPLC for the 5-HT levels. For blood pressure and heart rate, they use the Omron HEM 7210. And then we also had the Y counter Cobra 5010 quantum, and that was to measure cortisol. Now remember that 5-HT levels is serotonin receptors, and then cortisol is the stress hormone. And both of those machines needed the SST tubes for blood sampling. Here's our children's depression inventory. Now, this is just an example. It is not the full thing. And we also have the daily stress questionnaire based on Hassel's questionnaire. It was 36 questions. It was a Likert type scale, kind of like the children's depression inventory. And then a higher score on this scale indicates higher stress. So again, the two groups were randomly assigned. Then they did a pre-test and a post-test. And the pre-test, they measured their 5-HT levels, cortisol, blood pressure, heart rate, and psychological scale through the Children's Depression Inventory Scale, as well as the DHQ. Then both groups continued to receive the standard ADHD treatment, excuse me. And then the music therapy group got music therapy treatment twice a week for 1 hour at a time. And these sessions lasted for 3 months. These sessions were conducted by certified music therapists, and they were conducted in 3 stages. So the first stage in a session was the active portion. So that was when they got to play piano, got to play rhythm instruments. The next section or stage was the receptive music therapy. So that's music listening. And then whatever music listening they did, they put it in a folder that the students could access at home. So the treatment, like I said, was only twice a week. It was on Tuesdays and Thursdays. So any day that was not Tuesday or Thursday, they were supposed to be listening to that music at home and practicing the listening and the calming at home. And so before and after each music therapy session, blood samples were collected, and they also measured heart rate and blood pressure. And at the end of the study, just as they had done at the beginning, there was a post-test, just like the pre-test, and it analyzed neuropsychological and psychological parameters like the heart rate, blood pressure, cortisol levels, 5-HT levels, depression, or the children's depression inventory, and then DHQ. And our results showed that significantly higher 5-HT expression than the ADHD control group. So this is all for the music therapy group, and it's comparing them. So right here, you can see the pre is in white and the post is in blue, and this is our control group. So not much change over the course of 3 months. However, looking at our music therapy group, you can see that the serotonin levels were much higher in the post-test. We also see that lower cortisol levels were in the ADHD music therapy group as opposed to the ADHD control group. Again, here we see the ADHD control group. Here's pre-test and post-test, not much change. But if you look at the music therapy group, we have pre-test and post-test, and there is significantly less cortisol, so less stress hormone. We also see lower heart rate and blood pressure among the music therapy group. And here we have that. So SBP is systolic, and then the DBP is diastolic. So systolic blood pressure and diastolic blood pressure, excuse me. Here it is with our ADHD control group and then ADHD music therapy group. So you see these numbers, not much difference in the pre-test and post-test, but then you see the pre-test right here and post-test right here, a lot more of a difference. And then here's it comparing them. Lastly, we see that there were lower scores on depression and related stress skills. And on this one, you actually see a lot more difference. So here's our control group, pre and post, not much difference at all, if any, actually. And then the music therapy group, we have pre and post, big difference here, big differences. So love that for them. So in conclusion, music therapy can be non-pharmaceutical alternative treatment for depression and stress of ADHD, as well as it is an effective treatment method for developing the ability to cope with stress in children and adolescents with ADHD. So that's pretty much just saying that if, let's say, a parent is not really wanting to medicate their child, or maybe they don't do well on medication, if they want to do an alternative treatment, music therapy is a great option. Or, as most of us know, medication doesn't always fix the problem. So we have music therapy as a way to assist the medication and assist the student in coping with that stress and depression that comes along with ADHD. Thank you guys for watching and for listening. I hope you enjoyed it and found it as interesting as I did. And I cannot wait to hear back from you all. Thank you.